This lesson will introduce you to the idea of using trig ratios in order to find side length. In the directions, it asks us to use our calculator to find each of the trig functions to the nearest hundredth. I'm going to change those directions to say nearest 10,000th. And if you have your calculator handy, now's the time when you need it. If you don't, I want you to go ahead and pause the video so that you can get your calculator out. Great. Now that you've got your calculator out, let's go ahead and let's teach you how to use your calculator to find each of these trig functions. We're going to start by going home. And before we can find any trig function, it's very important to make sure that the settings on the calculator are correct. So in order to do this, I'm going to go into choice 5, which is settings, and then hit option 2, which is document settings. And I want the display digits to read float 12 and the angle to read as degree. Now I'm going to go ahead and click make that default so that it'll apply those settings both to my current document and any future documents that I open up. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to go open a new document. And notice that when I open this new document, I'm going to add the calculator. But notice that when I do, it tells me in the upper right hand corner of my calculator that I'm set to degrees. My trig button is right over here under the control. So to find the sine of 42 degrees, I'm going to go type in sine of 42, and then the degree button is right down here in the bottom left hand corner by pi. So there's my sine of 42 degrees. And I want to round to the nearest 10,000th, so 4 decimal places, or 0.6691. And I can go ahead and do that for each and every one of the trig ratios. Cosine of 38 degrees, again, I'm going to go hit the trig button. This time I want cosine of 38, and I can find the degree button right there next to pi. So 0.7880. And then lastly, the third one, the tangent of 88 degrees. .6363. Tangent of 76 degrees I can go find by typing that into the calculator. .0108. Sine of 15 degrees. .2588. And then lastly, the cosine of 54 degrees. So now you should be fairly comfortable and confident using the calculator to evaluate trig functions. This is important because we're going to go ahead now and use this skill to be able to solve the following problems. The directions say find x in each of the triangles below. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. Well, in order to do these, we're going to have to remember both what we did in the start of this video, finding our trig functions using the calculator, and what we know from our previous lesson about those trig functions. I'm going to ask you to recall that the sine of an angle is the ratio between its opposite side and its hypotenuse, that the cosine of an angle is the ratio between its adjacent side and the hypotenuse, and that the tangent of an angle is the ratio between its opposite side and its adjacent side. These are going to be important in helping us determine which trig ratio we're going to use to find a particular side. In looking at the first triangle that's been given, I've got this angle whose degree measure is 37. Recall that the side opposite the right angle is the hypotenuse. The side opposite the 37 degrees I'm going to label with an O, which means that x is the side adjacent to that angle. And I can see clearly from the way that I've pictured my or labeled my picture, I don't know the opposite, I don't want to know the opposite, but this problem is a problem that deals with the side adjacent to the angle and the hypotenuse. My trig ratio that deals with the side adjacent and the hypotenuse is my cosine ratio, and therefore that's why I'm going to use the cosine function in order to solve this problem. So the cosine of my angle, 37 degrees, is equal to the side adjacent, x, over the length of the hypotenuse, 14. My next move is going to be to go ahead and type that cosine of 37 degrees into the calculator. And when I do that, I find that the cosine of 37 degrees is about 0.7986. And I'm always going to put 4 decimal places on my paper. So in place of that cosine of 37 degrees, I'm going to put 0.7986. And that's equal to x over 14. The easiest way to solve a proportion is to cross multiply. So x now is going to be equal to 14 times the 0.7986 number. But here's the really important thing. I need to use that entire decimal display or multiply that entire thing by the 14, not just the first 4 digits. So I'm going to type in 14 times, and then I can either type in all of the digits of that decimal, which is kind of clumsy and complicated, or I can use my up arrow key to go highlight that number, and once it's highlighted I can just hit enter and it will copy that number right down to the next line for me. They want us to round this to the nearest tenth. So to the nearest tenth, this answer is going to round to 11.2. And notice that on my paper, instead of writing equals 11.2, I'm going to do the is about to indicate that that's a rounded number. So the value of x in this problem is approximately, or rounded to the nearest tenth, 11.2. All right, that's kind of a lot to take in here, a lot to remember. Let's go ahead and see how this would look in another example. So in this particular problem, the hypotenuse is this piece opposite the right angle. The side opposite the angle that we're working with here is x, and the side adjacent to the angle that we're working with here is 63. So I don't know the hypotenuse, I don't want to know the hypotenuse, but what I do either know or want to find is that opposite side x and that adjacent side 63. So I need to go up and I need to find the trig ratio that deals with the opposite side and the adjacent side. And that trig ratio is tangent, and that's the reason I'm going to use the tangent ratio for this problem. So tangent of 62 degrees is equal to the side opposite the 62, which is x, over the adjacent side, which is 63. Tangent of 62 degrees, I'm going to go put in my calculator. And again, I'm going to put the first four decimals. So 1.8807 is going to go down on my paper. And that's going to be equal to the x over the 63. And again, I'm going to put that 1.8807 number over 1 so that I can go ahead and cross multiply. So x, when rounded to the nearest tenth, is going to be the product of 63 and the 1.8807 number. So I'm going to go back to my calculator. I want that entire display, so I'm going to go highlight it, and I want to multiply that times 63. And when all is said and done, I want to round that answer to the nearest tenth. So 118.5. So x is about 118.5. All right, and then in the last example, x, or my hypotenuse in this particular case, is represented by x. My side opposite the angle that I'm working with is the 32. My leg adjacent to that angle is the one that is not distinguished either by x or by 32. So when looking at what I'm working with here, I have the hypotenuse and the opposite. So I need to find the trig ratio that deals with the hypotenuse and the opposite, and that's going to be my sine function. So sine of 43 degrees is equal to the opposite side, 32, over the hypotenuse, x. And I'm going to get my calculator out and go figure out what the sine of 43 degrees is. So 0.6819. And again, I'm going to put on my paper only the first four decimal places, regardless of what it rounds to. So 0.6819 is equal to 32 over x. And again, I'll put that over 1 so that I can cross multiply. So when I cross multiply in one direction, I've got 0.6819 times x is equal to 32 times 1, or just 32. And in this case now, to solve for x, I've got to divide both sides by the 0.6819 number. So x is going to be equal to the 32 divided by the 0.6819 number. So I'm going to go to my calculator, 32 divided by, and I'll go grab that number in its entirety from the display, hit enter, and to the nearest tenth, 46.9. All right, folks, so there you have it, how you can use those trig functions in order to find side lengths in triangles. As always, I want you to go summarize in your own words your findings up at the top of the next page, and then see if you can use your newfound knowledge to go ahead and solve the problems on that page.